Hey kids, I hope you're doing well. Today's lesson is going to be about quantifiers. But before we begin, I'd like to introduce you all to my friend Billy here. See him at the bottom left corner? He's going to be my helper. Now, before we actually go into detail about quantifiers, I'm going to tell you exactly what we're going to be talking about and the main points we'll be covering. So, what are we going to talk about today? First off, what do we mean by quantity and quantifier? Quantity is a word we're very familiar with, and it means amount. But how is the word quantifier related to it? Number two, are there different types of nouns? We've talked about this before when we discussed some and any, but just to make sure that you've all understood it really well, we're going to chat about them real quick. Number three, examples on quantifiers. Number four, how do we use quantifiers? So after we've given examples on quantifiers, these new words and phrases we're going to be learning, we're going to learn exactly how to use them. Now, what do we mean by quantity and quantifier? Oh, who's this guy? I see. Well, Billy's friend Tom has a really big jar of sweets. It looks like he's having a hard time counting them, though. Look at his face. He looks pretty frustrated. Do you guys think there's a way we can help him? He wants to express himself without being too exact, or maybe too specific. Exact or specific. Do you guys think there's a way we can do that? Well, if your answer is yes, then you're right, there is. The word quantity first basically means amount. We talked about this. We said that quantity means amount. How much or how many? Amount. Therefore, quantifiers are words that refer to a quantity or amount, but not a specific number. See, like Tim right here, he has a problem. He wants to tell us that there are a lot of sweets basically in this jar, but he does not want to use a specific number. Imagine counting all those sweets. It would take him ages. Types of nouns. So, you see, guys, let's actually look at types of nouns. And nouns are names of people, places, and things. Now, we already know that there are two types of nouns. You guys remember them: countables and uncountable nouns. Now, countable, when we talked about counting sweets, we said counting sweets, so you actually kind of know what countable means. What about uncountable? We added the prefix un to the actual word countable, and we already know that the prefix un turns the word into its opposite. So one of these words is the opposite of the other. So first off, countable nouns. They refer to nouns that can be counted. This means we can assign a number or give a number to each part of the object we are talking about. They have both singular and plural forms. So this means that the actual noun can come in a single form, or basically on its own, like the noun child, or ball, or banana, or apple, or cookie. But it could also come in plural form when it is expressing more than one thing, such as apples, children, cookies, balls, bananas, anything really. Uncountable nouns. On the other hand, uncountable nouns refer to concepts or ideas like hunger, or love, or hate, or information, or magic, and, well, uncountable other concepts. But they can also refer to things that are made up of parts that are either too small or too numerous to count. For example, air, sugar, coffee, or creamy substances and sauces like mayonnaise and ketchup as well. do you guys actually remember when we talked about water bottles in class and we said that the water inside the bottle is uncountable because it was too hard for us to count each particle of water inside of the actual bottle? It was actually virtually impossible. So we said that we could count the bottles of water in class, but we couldn't actually count the amount of water in each bottle. Am I right? Oh, Billy has something to add again. He's asking, do you guys remember the parts of speech we've learned so far? He's also giving us a hint and saying that there are 5. We actually have studied 5 parts of speech. Well, I'm sure you guys remember them, but I am actually going to remind you of the 5 parts of speech we've studied as well. We have nouns, verbs, adjectives, adverbs, and prepositions. Billy has something else to add. Well, he's telling us that there are also nouns that can be both countable and uncountable. Well, Billy, that's true. And I've included some in the list of nouns on the second page of the worksheet you actually took yesterday. Now, we're going to talk about examples on quantifiers. So now that we know what quantifiers are, and we've refreshed our memories and remembered the 2 types of nouns, I think you guys are ready for some examples on quantifiers. Do you think so? Great! So first we have many and much. Now, many and much. I'm sure these 2 words are familiar and that you've used them before, but let's get to know them a little more closely. Let's start with many. Now, we use many with plural countable nouns. See, nouns that are countable and are in the plural form, so not just one thing. We are counting more than one thing, like apples, like bananas, like children, like cookies. And also, when we are expressing ourselves using questions, we are forming questions. We're asking about something, so we're asking actually about a plural countable noun, so we use the actual quantifier many. Number 3, when we want to make negative statements. Negative statements, basically a sentence that is in the negative form. What about much? Now, on the other hand, we use much with uncountable nouns like water, air, like ketchup, like mustard, like mayonnaise, like countable other uncountable nouns. We can actually use much when we want to form questions, just like many, and when we want to talk about negative statements. So here we see that many and much have 2 things in common. We can actually use them both when we want to form questions or make negative statements. But the difference here is that many is used with plural and countable nouns, so countable nouns in the plural form, and much, on the other hand, is used with uncountable nouns. Now, many indicates large quantities. We use many when we're talking about a large quantity, a lot of things, a large quantity, something that is big. But here, much indicates large quantities as well. So they have this in common as well. So many and much have several things in common. We use both many and much to form questions, and when we're talking about negative statements, and both many and much indicate large quantities. Let's look at some examples. So, many. Are there many cupcakes left in the plate? See, here we used many, and we said cupcakes. Cupcake is a countable noun, and we used it in the plural form by adding an s. And we notice that it is a question from the question mark which is ending the sentence. That is sentence number 1. Now, what about example number 2? There aren't many oranges in the bowl. Again, we used many, which is the quantifier we're talking about here, and we added s to the noun, the noun which is the countable noun orange. We added s, so it is now in the plural form, and the statement is negative because of the not that is added to the actual verb are. What about much? Examples on much. Now, here we're looking at examples using the quantifier much. Number 1, is there much milk left in the cup? So this is obviously a question because we see the question mark at the end of a sentence, and we're using the quantifier much with an uncountable noun, which is milk. So is there much milk left in the cup? Example number 2, there isn't much salt in the shaker. It's obviously a statement because we don't see any sign of a question mark at the end of the sentence. And it is a negative one because, look guys, we see not attached to is, which is the verb in this sentence. So we use the quantifier much with a negative statement, and an uncountable noun, which is salt. You can't count the particles of salt. What about the second set of quantifiers? We got a lot of and plenty of. Now, once you think about it, they sort of sound the same, don't they? So let's see if there are differences between them. Now, let's start with a lot of. We use a lot of with, number 1, countable and uncountable nouns. So both countable and uncountable nouns take a lot of. And number 2, negative and positive statements. So whether a sentence is negative or positive, whether it is in the negative form or the positive form, we can use a lot of. Number 3, questions. When we form questions, we can also use a lot of. So basically, we can use a lot of in any sort of situation. What about plenty of? Now, plenty of, we use plenty of with. Number 1, countable and uncountable nouns, so both countable and uncountable nouns. Number 2, positive statements. We can't use the quantifier plenty of with negative statements. So basically, plenty of and a lot of have two things in common. We can use them with, number 1, both countable and uncountable nouns, and we can also use plenty of and a lot of with positive statements. Let's take a look at examples of sentences using the quantifier a lot of. Sentence number 1, there are a lot of marshmallows in the jar. So we can see that since there is no sign of not, this means that the sentence is in the positive form, and it is also obviously a statement since we don't see a question mark. So basically, we are using the quantifier a lot of with marshmallows, which is a countable noun because we see an S. So marshmallows is a countable noun, and we are using the quantifier a lot of. Now, number 2, there isn't a lot of sugar in the bowl. So we see that we're using the quantifier a lot of with the actual noun sugar. So sugar is an uncountable noun, and we are using the quantifier a lot of with sugar, and it is obviously a statement since we don't see a sign of a question mark, but it is also a negative one since not is attached to the verb is. So we use a lot of with an uncountable noun, and so far we've also used it with a countable noun. We have used it in a positive statement, and we have also used it in a negative statement. Now, number 3, is there a lot of bread left in the basket? A lot of is the quantifier here, and we are using it with an uncountable noun, which is bread. We can't actually count the particles making up bread, but we can say a loaf of bread. But in this sentence, we're talking about bread in general, so bread is an uncountable noun. And it is obviously a question since we see that there is a question mark ending the sentence. So we've used it in 3 different situations: when it is a positive statement, when it is a negative statement, and when we're using it with a question. What about examples of sentences using plenty of? Number 1, there is plenty of jam on the slice of toast. So it is a positive statement since we don't see any sign of not, and since the sentence is ending with a normal full stop and it is not ending with a question mark, then it is a statement, not a question. And we are using it with an uncountable noun, which is jam. Remember when we said we used uncountable nouns, we called jam an uncountable noun because it was sort of like a sauce, sort of like ketchup, sort of like mayonnaise. You can't really count the particles making up jam. Now, number 2, I see plenty of bananas in your bag. Plenty of is the quantifier here, and we are using it in a positive statement, talking about bananas, which are a countable noun. The third and last set of quantifiers we'll be talking about today is a little and a few. They both sort of sound the same, both sort of have the same meaning, but we use them in different situations. So let's find out the difference. We use a little with uncountable nouns, but on the other hand, we use a few with countable nouns. So a little goes with uncountable nouns, while a few goes with countable nouns. A little indicates small quantities, but so does a few. Then we say that both a little and a few indicate small quantities. If we're going to look at a few examples that actually contain the quantifier a little. There is a little coffee left in your mug. You should drink it. We can't count the particles of coffee because coffee is also a liquid. So there is a little coffee left in your mug. You should drink it. On the other hand, if we were going to look at examples with it's actually one example of a sentence containing the quantifier a few, we will see that there are a few pancakes left from this morning. I'm saving them for my sister. A few pancakes. Pancakes here is a countable noun. We can notice that it is countable because it is made up of basically small parts that you can actually count. You can actually count the number of pancakes in a plate. And there's also an S at the end of the word, which makes it countable. Billy thinks that these are the easiest quantifiers to remember. And I think Billy has a point. Let's look at the next slide. Now, after we've actually talked about a series of different quantifiers, or this group of quantifiers that you guys have already learned about, I think we should actually learn how to use quantifiers. When do I use which quantifier in what situation? So, we use different quantifiers in different situations based on the following. Number one, is the noun we are talking about countable or uncountable? So I'm going to read I read the sentence, and before actually choosing the quantifier I'm going to be using, I have to ask myself if the noun I am talking about is countable or uncountable. Number two, is the sentence a question or a statement? We look at the sentence and we see, does it end with a full stop or does it end with a question mark? Number three, is the sentence in the positive or negative form? And you guys, I'm pretty sure that you guys know how to tell the difference between both. So Billy says, we should always ask ourselves these three questions whenever we want to choose a quantifier. And I think Billy is onto something.